So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sarah, for starting us off. I'd really like to keep room for questions. So we're going to go through this, what we've planned out, and then hopefully there'll be room for questions for you all to participate. So I thought, first of all, thank you to our panelists who are here. I thought to start things off, and I'm sure some of these statistics will be covered again later on in the day, but I thought just to give some context about the Frankfurt Book Fair. It's the largest book fair in the world. 300,000 visitors attend every year. Approximately 7,300 exhibitors, 750 titles on display from 180 countries from around the world. And it's the most important marketplace for rights and licensing worldwide. And today we're joined by some three very able and successful practitioners, let's call them. And so I thought maybe to start, we could, first, I think the way we're going to approach this is via a investigative journalism approach, is sort of deconstructed who, what, where, when, how, and why, or however it normally sounds. So I thought we'd start first by, we won't cover all of them individually, but we'll certainly touch on the fundamentals. And why don't we start by, if we could get each panelist to briefly explain how they got into selling rights, because everyone at this table is sort of comes from a different background, and when was the first time they attended the Frankfurt Book Fair? So Parisa, let's start with you.
Okay, so I've worked in publishing for 24 years, primarily in a special sales and corporate sales capacity, but rights had always been the ultimate destination for me. Luckily, a position opened up with the company that I was with, Firefly Books, about 6 years ago, and that was my first Frankfurt Book Fair in 2011.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, I'm not sure how close I should sit. Well, interestingly enough, at BookThug, it took us a little bit longer to get into where we were selling rights, but in fact, we were buying rights right from the beginning. In fact, our very first book that we ever published was a book that we bought rights from Denmark. And so we continued with acquisitions for a number of years before we started selling. And our first sales really were more into French Canada, and since then we've sold into other territories. And my first Frankfurt Book Fair was last year. Gone all of one time.
Nice.
And for me, I got into selling rights because out of the book publishing program, I really enjoyed the art of the deal, and I was able to get an internship right into KidsCanPress as a rights intern, and I continued on for, it's about 11 years now. My first Frankfurt was in 2008, and I've been 9 times now.
Oh. Hazel, why don't we go back to you? So your first Frankfurt was in 2017. Let's move into the who and why. So why did you decide to go to Frankfurt in 2017? And who did you reach out to when you made that decision? What were your first steps?
Well, I decided to go last year, finally. I had been contemplating going for a couple of years, but it is a big decision to really make. And we had a rights agent who had been repping books for us for the previous several years. So I felt like that was being covered somewhat, but I really wanted to attend myself. And with the news of Canada being guest of honor at Frankfurt in 2020, that really just sealed the deal for me, if you will, that the time was now. An early piece of advice I had received from fellow publishing colleagues years prior was, before going to Frankfurt, do something like the London Book Fair first. A smaller fair, still big, but smaller certainly. So in fact, my first foray was to attend the London Book Fair last year as a trial run up to going to Frankfurt in October. And when I made that decision, after going back and forth and talking with different people about should I go, shouldn't I go, I finally decided to go a month out, which I wouldn't recommend, but I did. And I immediately reached out to, again, publishers I'd spoken to in the past, saying, okay, I'm doing it. What advice can you give me? And everyone was so generous with advice, everything from sending me a template of a meeting schedule to very, very graciously sharing names of contacts. And before I knew it, I actually had booked 25 meetings, which I went in thinking if I can get 10 meetings, I'll be really, really happy. But with only 3 weeks out to the London Book Fair, I felt pretty pleased with that. And so off I went, and I had a good experience. And by the time I got back, it was time to start preparing and thinking about Frankfurt already. But I felt fresh and ready to jump right in. And so I now had those meetings behind me and those contacts who were very happy to hear from me again, thankfully, and willing to see me again in Frankfurt. And the contact list grew from there. So.
And for those first meetings when you were approaching for the London Book Fair, did you essentially cold call? Did you sort of present yourself?
Yes. In some cases, no. Like, I have met people certainly over the years, and so in those cases, of course, they were hi, how are you doing? Guess what? I'm coming to London. Shall we meet? And in many cases, they were like, absolutely, and you should also meet with my colleague from, or this publisher from. And so that was great. And I also had not only received some tips from other publishers about, here's like a template of a meeting schedule, but here as well as a template of an email that I could send, a cold email. So often that was it. And I honestly, every time I hit send on an email, I thought, I don't know if I'll really hear back from these people or not. You are sending a cold email. But honestly, about 98% of the emails I sent, I got responses back from. So I felt really, really happy about that.
And I want to pick up a bit on the idea of reaching out to your Canadian colleagues. I know Sarah said, don't stick to your own. But personally, when I went to my own to my first book fair, had it not been for the generosity of people reaching out to me, or maybe Barbara Housen telling them to reach out to me and taking me out to dinner or showing me around the city, giving me tips, I don't know what I would have done. Adrienne or Parisa, do you have any?
Yeah, I would say that definitely the reaching out to your colleagues around who have been to fairs in the past, getting tips from them, that's really helpful. And it also helps make the experience easier, knowing that there is kind of a friendly face that can help you out in a situation if you are missing tape, for example, and you need to put stuff up in your booth. Just kind of having that support group is really helpful.
And I have Adrienne to thank for my first Frankfurt. And she was there and graciously took me under her wing and showed me around, gave me some tips, because nothing really prepares you for your first Frankfurt. People will tell you, and you'll get advice, but when you get there, it's exhilarating. It is contagious. The energy is incredible. But to have that backup, that sense of community is really helpful, for sure.
Yeah, the collegiality of Canadians, I think, is so key. Yeah. Okay, so how about we move into the how? Earlier this year, or late last year, I was meeting with Holly Kent from the OBPO and David Caron, and David had we were talking about Frankfurt and about this initiative, and he had two good questions that I'd like to put out to you guys. The first is, how do you fill up your schedule? It's often a book fair is 3 to 5 days, depending on when you get there and what kind of, if you're an adult publisher, you might get to Frankfurt on the Sunday and start taking meetings unofficially on Monday, Tuesday before the book fair starts on Wednesday, and then go all the way till Saturday. or you'll start Wednesday and go till Sunday. How do you fill up your schedule?
I'll start. So for us, when we reach out to people to begin with that we already know, so if there's anyone that you might know, you might reach out to them, email them with a suggested time, like ask if they would like to meet if they're attending, and suggest a date or a time slot. But also, if you don't have many contacts, it's really, there are a few resources. So the Frankfurt Book Fair website, there's an exhibitors directory. And so if you are attending the fair, you might have access to this directory. I think even if you don't have a password, you can access the directory. And it's quite detailed, so you can filter and look for the exact genre, type of publisher, country, publishers from certain countries that you're looking for, and you start reaching out to them. There's contact information there. Thank you. So you start doing research and looking on their websites, seeing if they're like-minded publishers who are publishing things that you think would, where your titles might fit on their list, and you start cold calling or cold emailing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I also, just to jump in, I think it's also very valuable to get subscriptions to Publishers Marketplace. They essentially every day you can get a newsletter, a lunch newsletter with rights deals and from around the world, and often you see things that have been sold that sound kind of similar to something that you might have, and then you can reach out to those publishers, and maybe they're not interested, but then that could lead into might you be available in Frankfurt for a meeting? I think I might have other things to show you. And so.
And if you work with agents, it's always great to stay in touch with them throughout the year. Don't just wait until, June or July to book that appointment. Have they taken on new publishers? Are there new contacts that they can help facilitate a meeting with a new publisher, a new contact at the fair? So take advantage of your agents if you have them.
Actually, maybe we could briefly explain who these agents are for the audience.
So Firefly works with literary agents across the globe, and we work exclusively with them. They represent various publishers in their countries, and for example, our Chinese agent covers simplified and complex Chinese language, and she would probably be my most lucrative and A-list person to meet with. She helps facilitate meetings with publishers in addition to my presentation to her. We are in touch on a weekly basis, if not sometimes daily. You don't have to be exclusive with an agent. We've chosen to go that route, but visit the Agents Center in Frankfurt and have a chat with some of them and see what they can bring to your business.
That's a great tip. And then the second thing that David was really harping on about was, how do you have meaningful meetings? Sarah touched on this a little bit too. Don't pitch your whole list. Know how to read the person that you're pitching to. But maybe Adrienne, do you have any tips on?
Yeah, I would say ask questions. So learning about what that publisher is looking for, what they publish, will really help you, I think really importantly, curate what you're presenting to that publisher. As Sarah had mentioned, pitching everything is not exciting. It's a recipe for glazed eyes, and so understanding what publishers are the publisher that you're meeting with is looking for will really help you choose the right book to pitch to them. And just listening to what their feedback is. So knowing when to stop pitching a book. If they're really not interested, if they're giving you signs that the art isn't right for children's books, for example, or if that topic is something that they don't cover or that they've already published recently and it's not complementary to their list, you have to know when to stop and move on to the next title, because you really want that publisher to respect kind of your judiciousness in the titles that you're choosing, and your honesty. So knowing that these are honestly the best titles that you need to look at versus
Everything.
everything.
Is great.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hazel, did you pick up on anything when you started doing these international pitching sessions?
Yes, certainly. And I think knowing who you're meeting with is certainly key. Do your homework, do your research ahead of sitting down with this person. And, if you haven't been able to glean a sense of what they might be looking for, then certainly ask. Don't just jump in assuming that what you're about to pitch them is what they want to hear about. The other thing I would highly recommend, though, is also don't just sit down and start pitching. You've got generally, say, 30 minutes or 25 minutes, whatever, for a meeting, and you quite possibly meeting someone for the first time, and you need to have some proper chit-chat at the beginning to really learn to feel comfortable with each other. I think that that's important. I think that really just eases everyone, and then take that moment to then start the pitch. And if they're not interested, you'll sense that, and don't take it personally, and just move on to the next title. And lastly, I would say, if you come away from the meeting feeling like, well, I guess and you might feel that I didn't really have anything that was of interest to them, don't assume that that's not a contact to pursue again in the future, because it might just be that right now you don't have a project that's of interest to them, but that's not to say in the future that you won't have something, or that they might not have something for you. So keep that contact.
That's great. Another thing that I've done in the past that's been very helpful is take notes on what we've talked about, so that I can follow up the next time. How are your twins doing? Or you had that big trip planned, I remember. Sorry? Oh. Peanut gallery. I think it really pays off if you do pay attention to the conversations you're having and can pick up. And the more personable you can be, I think the more beneficial to your business in the long run. Moving on to when do you start and finish? Parisa, I thought maybe you could take us through a typical timeline in getting us. Claudia Saber at the back asked a question after Sarah's keynote about when do you start? So I think it would be great if you could tell us how to start to getting to Frankfurt.
So we take a stand on the Canada stand, and we've already registered for October this month. So that email will come through from Leave Canada, and our stand is set now. The next process is booking our hotel. Our hotel is also booked because we want to ensure that we have the availability at the hotel that we prefer. Flights are booked now also because you want to get a good rate. You don't want to wait to the last minute and pay a ridiculous amount for your flight. So what we need to do is work backwards from the date that Leave Canada requires our material, and that's usually mid-September. So we work backwards from that date. We customize a catalog every fair, so that entails us working with the marketing and production team on updating our list. Have there been new rights sales? Are there new titles that we need to be focusing on and making forefront in the catalog? Scheduling meetings begins in about June for myself, but it doesn't end until Frankfurt Book Fair, because things are constantly evolving. Meetings are being called in or emailed by my agents and saying, can you meet this particular publisher? Do you have time? If we can't squeeze them in, we'll squeeze them in at breakfast, at dinner, a drink, at And another opportunity is to invite people to the Canada Stand event. It's usually on the Wednesday night. Invite people, have them come by for a drink. International publishers that maybe didn't have time to meet with you, to book an appointment. They're happy to come and chat, and that's always a really good place and time to network, and you might be able to secure a meeting. I've also started to bring an iPad with me to the fair. So this iPad on the cloud contains all of my rights PDFs. So after a meeting, if I have 2 minutes, that's what the PDFs in their hands, like that day. And then, as Sarah mentioned, they're looking for electronic material. No one wants to walk away with a book. And if they're super interested, they will ask for a hard copy after the fair, post-fair follow-up. So that's another tip I would definitely give to you guys, is to have PDFs handy, have some electronic material that you're able to send, because the first PDF that gets in the buyer's hands will be the first one that they look at and able to consider.
And we've touched a bit about notes and preparing for meetings. What do you put in those notes? You have so many appointments per day. You're sitting there and someone comes to you and you quickly glance down. What's right in front of you?
So in my notes, I when I'm making my notes, it's 2 to 3 weeks before the fair. And I reference any emails that I've had since I've met with them, either in London, Bologna, or the previous Frankfurt. And then I also reference the actual notebook that I took with me last year. So I keep all my notebooks, and I have a stash of them that I go back to. I may go back 2 years. I may go back 3 years. There's backlist titles that are our bread and butter of our business. So if they passed on it 1 year, maybe their publishing program has evolved since then. Maybe they've added a genre that they weren't successful with before, but have found to be lucrative to them presently. So it's always really good to go back and research your own notes and see how applicable they are to the current situation and that current publishing program, and remind them.
So I'll jump in with the notes. So with us, when we do our notes, so it always kind of starts the same with name, company name, what country this publisher is from, date and time, just so that everything's organized, and you don't have multiple notes on the same page, because you don't want other people seeing who you were meeting with previously with, or what you'd written. And I also do I do research on the company itself. So I'll go onto their website. If they have an English section, I'll try and get a blurb or a summary about what kind of publisher they are, especially if I've never met them before. And I go on their website to see what kind of books they're buying in, and make note of that, so that it might be a trigger for me to pitch something, to show them something. Any follow-up notes that I need to discuss with them. So do they have outstanding royalty reports that they need to send? And finally, I think really importantly, is what I'm hoping to show them. So kind of thinking in advance of what I'd like to present to them, so that it's not, everything isn't just on the spot, but just a couple, but not your whole list, but just a couple of titles, just so that you have somewhere to start.
Great. And what about when you get to Frankfurt? What does that look like? From beginning to end.
So Frankfurt starts officially on Wednesday. And so most Torontonians, I guess, or Canadians fly out on the Sunday night. They might land on Monday morning or Monday afternoon. And then Tuesday is kind of official, like you start setting up your stand. There's dinners, cocktails that might happen that evening. So the ACP has a networking dinner that happens on the Tuesday night. And then officially on Wednesday, the fair starts. And so Wednesday morning, it starts at 9 a.m. is the official opening of the doors. You might be able to get a couple appointments in beforehand, but for the most part, people arrive at 9. And your appointments are generally, well, they're almost always 30 minutes long. So it's always on the hour, half hour. And on a day-to-day, it's just greeting people, making sure you've got the right appointment coming to sit down, because there are the stands are small and the aisles are pretty narrow, and there's a lot of people. So you just want to make sure that you've got the right appointment, or maybe they're just trying to find, like, they're at the wrong booth by accident. And you greet, you do your meeting, and then I'd say around like the 25-minute mark, you want to make sure you wrap it up, just so that you don't go over your time, the other person isn't going over their time, and you don't end up having this snowball effect where all of your meetings are late for the rest of the day. So just knowing when to wrap it up is really important. And yeah, I guess.
What do you do after at 5 o'clock? Does the clock stop, or are you still?
No. 6 o'clock is, I think 5:30 is normally your last appointment. Sometimes there's a 6 o'clock appointment. And then from there, you've probably got drinks. There's a lot of parties that happen. So on the stands, the Irish stand has a really fun party. On the Wednesday, there is the Canadian cocktail that's on the Canadian stand, and then there will normally be a dinner with clients, and then there's the Frankfurter Hof or the Hessischer Hof for drinks after that. So it's a very long day, and yeah.
And I think there's quite a few people in the audience who do attend Frankfurt who can attest to doing some of their deals at night in these smoky bars. And then perhaps waking up the next morning and wondering what they got themselves into. What about follow-up? How do you approach follow-up when you get back? Do you drop everything? And Parisa seems to be really on it and starts doing it at the book fair, which is enviable. But when you get back to Canada, do you try to get through it right away, or do you do it piecemeal?
It's a process, that's for sure. Hopefully I'd sent all the PDFs that I had by then, but then there are replies. So because I've sent them in advance, I will get, oh, well, great. Can you send us a quote? Can you give us, any reviews? And so. And then they'll ask for the hard copies. So we're sending out hard copies and catalogs again. So in addition to the follow-up of the meetings that I've had, I've also had some really good walk-bys. And never underestimate the power of a good walk-by, because we have been known to have and created great partnerships and closed a couple of deals just for us standing and being there at the stand, and someone will walk by and say, wow, you know what, can I have a look at that book? And that's all it is. It's one book, caught their eye, they've looked at it, you send the PDF, and that's turned into a meeting at the next Frankfurt, at London, and a potential deal. So also I receive a lot of business cards. People will walk by, and that's a part of my follow-up. And when I do have time to walk through the fair, at the end of the fair, I collect business cards from like publishers on different, various international publishers that I will follow up. And I popped by your stand. I noticed we have a comparable list. Can I send you our rights catalog? And there you can make a new contact there as well.
That's great. Yep. Hazel, from your first experience at Frankfurt this past year, what stood out for you, or what was the most, overwhelming aspect of the whole process from start to finish?
Well, a number of things. So I don't take a stand. I walk the fair the whole time. So I'm walking to all of my meetings. So certainly there was a challenge to figure out how to set up my schedule to allow for the proper amount of time to get between meetings. And over the years, the stories I've heard about, just how big Frankfurt is, and it is big, but in my mind I think I'd grown it exponentially much, much larger. So I was building in too much time, it turned out. I thought it was going to take me a really long time to get between pavilions, and that wasn't actually the case. And it's so organized, it's so orderly that I just found myself, I had a little bit too much time. So that was a takeaway, that next for this year I won't worry about building in like a full half hour to get from pavilion 4 to 6, thinking I was going to need that. But another big challenge I had first Frankfurt, I got sick the minute I got off the plane. I landed and was getting my luggage and was like, oh, I'm really sick. And everyone said, well, welcome to Frankfurt. You're doing it right. You've already got the legendary cold that most of us get at the end. You've just got it at the beginning. So I wasn't prepared for that. I had, in fact, had scheduled a cold for the following week in my mind, thinking I will be sick next week. But I got sick beforehand, and I didn't have anything with me to sort of take care of myself, which was also a big takeaway. Come prepared with a little plethora of such things in case you find yourself sick the moment you get off the plane. But people who'd been to Frankfurt many times before had such a plethora at their table often, and were just readily giving me, try this, try that. So I'm forever grateful to them. But yes, it was really just, the biggest thing was just being organized, making sure I had my schedule in front of me, knew where I was going, knew how to get there. I tried to also build in time to make sure I was walking the floor. I had a pretty full meeting schedule all said and done, but I still made sure to fill in some extra time to just walk around and look, because that's an amazing way to just see other publishers that might not have had a chance to come across otherwise, and if they were available to chat then and there, great. If not, then we could exchange cards and have follow-up afterwards. So
Great. And how was the follow-up for you when you got back to?
Yeah, the follow-up was great. I did not think to send PDFs then and there, but I wouldn't have been able to because I was rushing off to my next meeting anyway. But I did do all of my follow-up upon arriving back in Canada. Many people were actually funny because I would always answer send the email saying, it was so wonderful to meet with you, and I'm so sorry to only just be getting this to you, and they'd be like, wow, you're so eager, thanks so much. I'm only just arriving home, no worries. Everyone was actually, if anything, a little surprised to receive my follow-up so quickly, and there I was prefacing it with an apology for thinking I was late. But I just did it. I just sort of dropped whatever else I had waiting for me and immediately dealt with the follow-up of sending whatever books people had asked to receive. And also in many cases I had asked to receive some books from them, so I would always sort of just make a point of gently reminding them to send that to me when they had the time to do so. And then there is a little bit of back and forth that can occur. So that was just something, that you deal with in your regular email of every day. And the thing I think that caught me most by surprise, though, was this sort of otherwise sort of what turned out to be somewhat frequent, perhaps somewhat infrequent, correspondence that does occur between fairs as well. There's a lot of people now that I receive regular emails from, just checking in and or sending a new book that they perhaps have just published that they're really excited about. And so that surprised me. Probably shouldn't have, but it did. And but that's fine. Yeah.
Just regarding follow-up, one thing that I think that I just wanted to touch on was making sure that you also kind of track things. So whether it be contacts, So making sure that with your business, all the business cards that you get, that you put it into, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or a database if you have one, for contact information. That ensures just that that ensures that you don't have to just look at your physical business cards and notes pile, but that you have it kind of electronically somewhere all in one place, and that you can just update addresses as the years go by, or email addresses, and then also what you're submitting. So what you are sending out to people, it's pretty handy to have it tracked somewhere, who you sent what to and when, and then also what the response was. That way, it's a pretty easy way to see who hasn't responded, and you can further follow up in later weeks or months.
Yeah, the follow-up never stops, really. Let's move on quickly to what. We've sort of we've touched on this a bit, but Adrienne, you sell a lot of children's picture books. Do you, I mean, I've seen, I don't know if you still do it, but you used to come with like stacks of proofs. Do you still, is that?
Yeah, so we end up making for Bologna this year, we end up making booked proofs, so like dummies or like nicely printed and bound versions of our upcoming season. So the files will pretty much all be kind of ready, and like it looks like a book, but just in a kind of a staple bound form. And then for later seasons, because I sell pretty far out, I will print out whatever I have that my designers are willing to give me of new titles. So they're pages, and they might be rough illustrations all set, but with a couple of final pieces of art so that the publisher can see what that style is going to look like. But I find that the physical pages are a lot easier for people to kind of see and visualize, but also to, there's something tactile, and most publishers like to hold on to something or flip something. So I have pitched off of iPads in the past in other situations, but I find for Frankfurt, having printouts and something physical is really important, even if it's a one-pager too. So sometimes for our young adult titles, I'm not printing out the pages of that manuscript, but I'll have like a one-pager that they can hold and touch or circle or whatever they need. So that kind of so book proofs, flat pages, and then we also ship any backlist titles physically ahead of time. And the LCB helps us with that with a consolidated shipment that normally runs around September, as Parisa had mentioned. So anything we can get into those boxes ahead of time, we ship that in advance. And anything that is newer, we carry with us.
And Hazel, walking around the fair, obviously, I mean, there's only so much you can cart around with you, but as a literary publisher, how are you pitching? Are you pitching from a catalog, or?
Yeah, I have my Rights Catalog with me. It's nice and portable, like Sarah pointed out. So it's obviously also lighter to carry. My business cards, of course. And I usually do carry one copy of select titles that I'm particularly excited about, whether that's an advanced copy or the final copy, because I do think that publishers, do appreciate at least seeing the book and getting to hold it. And you know what, we're proud of our books, and we think they look really nice too. And you can see a thumbnail of a cover image in the catalog, but I like to sort of say, but here it is. And I think that's nice. And often someone will say, can I have that at the end? Like, if I find you, can I take that home? So I actually find that people don't necessarily want the book on the spot, but they're often, I end up giving them all out by the end of the fair, for sure. But
So you have a whole stock in your hotel room.
yes. But I am, of course, I do have to be mindful of what I'm carrying because I am lugging that bag around with me all day.
And Parisa, do you work off of an iPad, namely?
I used to bring my laptop, but now I'm storing all the PDFs on my iPad. I don't present off of the iPad. We also bring digital books and spreads and select backlist that has been successful for us. But we have a partnership now with the National Film Board of Canada, and we have books that have previously been released as award-winning or award-nominated titles. Films. And so I will bring those films. And if someone's interested, they'll get to see a clip of it. And I find that that's a nice tool to have with me while I'm pitching the book.
And what about anything else that you guys bring with you that has nothing to do with books, but that you bring with you onto the stand?
Hand sanitizer.
I found like a little pencil case is always handy so that I can have like my pens, staplers, so important, as Sarah had mentioned earlier, business cards, and a watch. I forgot a watch the first year that and that was pre-phone, it being acceptable to have a phone out. So I had to run out and get a watch because you really need to be able to keep time while you're there.
And besides that, though, have water with you. Have a granola bar, an apple, something, because they're long days and you don't really have. Sorry. You're not necessarily going to have time to go and have lunch. So have snacks with you. I find I'm that person at my hotel in the morning, if there's a breakfast out, that I'm sort of, pocketing a few extra things to carry with me through the day.
Yeah, there's a few of us in this room who are guilty of bringing Ziploc bags with us to breakfast and sneaking little sandwiches because you don't have time to eat often. And another thing I'd say that House of Anansi and Groundwood used to do and still probably do is we buy snacks for our table to give to their table to give to clients. And also we always have, or you always have, Sarah, Baraka. This what's it called? An effervescent pill? That it's essentially a hangover pill that we often give to foreign publishers who come. No, and on full service publisher. No. But Tylenol, I mean, someone mentioned earlier, pharmacy stuff. It's so important to have those things on you.
Can I just make one tip? If you're directionally challenged, like I am, walking this fair, and still after 7 years, I will walk in a circle and end up trying to get somewhere and end up at the same place I started. And I would download the Frankfurt Book Fair app on your phone if you can. It's really helpful. It'll get you from A to B without wasting any time. So just another tip.
So just before we move on to questions, I thought it would be nice if everyone could give one or two insights or key takeaways, tips from their experience or things they wish they had known before going to their first book fair. Who wants to start?
Okay, I'll start. A few things that I had mentioned, like that I'd thought of that weren't covered. So in terms of booking, when you're scheduling appointments, if you have a stand, one thing is try not to book publishers from the same country back to back. That was one thing that I was told very strictly about, because you don't want the awkwardness of having two publishers from two competitive publishers seeing each other at the stand or being able to overhear, because the area is very small, what they're looking for. So that was one thing that I think some people don't realize when they're booking appointments. And you really need to try and get as much sleep as possible. With jet lag and the excitement, I still get really nervous before the start of the fair. It's very rare that I get like more than 3 hours of sleep the night before the fair. So do what you need to do. Sleeping pills or whatever it is, melatonin. Try to get that rest before, because it's a very long, it's a long couple days.
Yeah, I was, to pick up on that, certainly, pace yourself. I'm actually not one to like to stay out very late nights. And when I was in Frankfurt, I was rooming with someone who's, I think, goes to Frankfurt to go to the Hof. Like, I think that the whole day is just about getting there, which might be true for some, and for me, I was like, I need to go home. So I put my time in there every night, but I was like very mindful, of trying to get back and get to sleep, because they're very long days, and I was already sick. So I do think it's important to be mindful, to take care of yourself. It's a really long week, and you have a lot of follow-up when you get back. So you need to be ready for that as well. Have medicine with you. That was my big takeaway. Thankfully, people had it to give to me, but next time I will have my own little stash. And one other thing that I thought I wish I'd understood better is when someone says, let's meet in front of the elevators in the entrance to the IRC. And I thought, sure, we can do that. And then you realize there are 200 or whatever other people also there to meet people, and you don't necessarily know who you're looking for, and you're sort of running around trying to very surreptitiously look at everyone's name tag with trying to identify the person you're finding. So doing that sort of further research to maybe get a picture of who that person is, or maybe they've thought ahead of time to even send you a picture or even a description of who they are or what they look like, so that you can hopefully spot them easier. Because I did find myself running around a lot, just kind of looking at people who are saying, or are you? And they say, you already asked me that. So.
I would, if you can, come 2 days earlier to try and assimilate to the timing, if you can. If time allows, it really is helpful so that when the first day of the fair begins, you're not dozing off or, feeling incredibly overwhelmed. That has helped me a lot. I had some good advice from a colleague, and I've started to do that, and it's been really helpful. I'm not as exhausted. And try and take some time to walk around the fair. Try and get out there if you can, and see what other publishers have on display, their stands, and talk to people.
Thank you. And I'll just add two, just for fun, to close. One being, remember, if you do have a stand, do make sure to, and you're shipping books, do make sure to ship your boss's favorite books, because if you don't, you get into trouble. And I'm not talking about either of you. I'm talking about someone else. Really? Yes, I once forgot to ship actually her partner's book, her boyfriend's book, which was terrible. But anyway, it was my first fair, so rookie mistake. And then the second thing I'll say, which I heard from Thomas Minkus, who's one of he is a vice president of the Frankfurt Book Fair, and his solution, or his way of getting through the week, is to stop drinking anything by midnight every night, and to ensure that he gets 5 hours of sleep, and that's how he gets through the fair. So I try to do that as well. And yeah, so thank you, everyone. I think we do have some time for questions. It's 10:20, and our break is at 10:45. So yeah, so we could take. We could have, I don't know, 5 minutes of questions. Any questions? Eva Maria.
No question, but a small other piece of advice. Frankfurt is actually a very small town, so So it's easy to get around. It's really easy to walk everywhere or take the subway. And it's so nice to do something outside of the fair. So if you can, book your drink stay, book your dinner somewhere at the other end of Frankfurt. You'll find there is a life outside of the fair, and it's enormously restoring to be out of the bubble of the fair, at least for a couple of hours.
Very true. And you get free transit access with your pass into the book fair, which is great. Oh. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, Kate.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how Frankfurt relates to the other fairs. You touched a bit on it, but if you're going to London, what's the play between the two?
Did everyone hear that? Yeah.
Do you go to London? Do you want to talk about London?
I've never been to London.
We attend both fairs. London is quieter. A lot of people will choose London or Bologna if they are a children's publisher because they've already been to Frankfurt. So you won't get the number of appointments that you'll have in Frankfurt. So there is a toss-up for some publishers whether they're going to go to Bologna or London. We go to both, so I try and get as much ground covered, but it's not as the pace is slower. It's a more relaxed feel to the fair as opposed to Frankfurt and the energy of Frankfurt. Nothing can compare to that.
So as I mentioned earlier, I went to London last year first sort of as a trial run to going to Frankfurt, and I'm about to go to London again in a couple of weeks. I found it a pretty dynamic fair. I don't know. That was but also maybe because it was my very first time attending any fair was London. The one thing I will say though is, as big as Frankfurt is, and however many pavilions there are, I found that the London Book Fair, which is contained within one building, is a very confusing building, and I got lost nearly every time I turned around. I really need to actually, in fact, build in more time between meetings in London because I do get lost every time I turn around, whereas in Frankfurt, everything is very orderly, and so.
And I'll add that I think London is a good in-between fair between Frankfurt and well, during the rest of the year. It's an opportunity to go to meet up again with your international colleagues, and during a less intense period. It's shorter too. It goes by much faster. Oh, yes?
I was going to comment and ask if you find that the way you approach the rights sales in London are different from the way you approach them in Frankfurt. One of the things I noticed when I started going to the fair, that in Frankfurt I could have a catalog that would list backlist titles, and for translation rights, the backlist titles are always still of interest. I found instead in London I had the opportunity to meet with many more English language publishers, and in that case in London they were more interested in stuff that we could publish together. So it would be, instead of looking at the backlist, they weren't so interested in backlist as they were in forthcoming titles that could be published simultaneously in both countries. So I wondered if you might comment on that a little bit.
We also buy from companies like Octopus and Quarto, and so we find that we are able to work on those relationships and English rights with our UK partners as well. So yes, there's more time for that, and we've closed several deals that way in London. So yes, thank you for pointing that out.
Catherine.
Well, my question is for Hazel, because Hazel, one of the things that you had said in talking about this event, which I thought was so impressive, was that at your first Frankfurt you managed to get 40 meetings. I find that quite astonishing, and so I just thought, I know you've talked about how you have worked the fair, but can you just sort of expound on how it is that you were able to be so successful in actually finding the partners, the publishing partners for your list?
Thank you, Catherine. I'm not sure. I really do credit, again, what I mentioned earlier are the publishing colleagues that I reached out to very early on. Luciana, I owe a huge debt of gratitude to, for example, was someone who really mentored me the moment I reached out to her and said, I'm going to go to London, can you help? And she said, absolutely. Here's a meeting template, meeting schedule template. Here's a template for an email. Here are some contacts. And likewise with some other people that I reached out to who were very gracious and shared similar things with me. My contact list kind of just suddenly grew before I knew it. Not to mention, of course, the work I put into researching companies, or in a few cases, publishers that we have bought rights from in the past, and reaching out to them and taking meetings, and then they too would say, you might also want to meet with this house. And so I really just was overwhelmed by the generosity and the collegiality of other publishers who were really very helpful in helping me build my contact list. And I'm forever grateful, and I hope to one day be able to pay that forward, certainly to anyone else attending a book fair for the first time. As far as maybe what I put into my meals, I don't know. I think I'm a pretty personable person. I don't know, not to go there, but I think people enjoy receiving a nice, warm, friendly email, and in most cases they'd be like, sure, let's meet. So it would grow from there.
Okay, I think, one more.
You said that you buy titles as well as sell your own. How do you manage that within meetings? Is it
I travel with our president, and he does the buying, and I do the selling. I will attend some buying meetings, and if he's not able to attend, I go on his behalf. And so it's not just a one-person job. There's two of us.
There's one of us.
So how did you handle that then?
I don't know, the way I handled everything else, just sort of as it came at me. I mean, really, last year was my first time for both London and Frankfurt. So as much as I hoped I was prepared and ready, I really sort of took each day, each meeting as it came at me and juggled as best I could, made as many notes as I could, running to and from meetings, this person is interested in this, or they're going to send me that. And again, that follow-up just being so key, and then keeping that follow-up going, rather than just, it's not just, we'll be in touch again next year at Frankfurt. It's that regular, frequent contact that you end up establishing with them.
Yes, Luciana.
Hi, I had a colleague that I met with last year, a Canadian colleague in Frankfurt who buys and sells right, and I asked him, how do you do it? And he says, well, Blue, it's simple. I just sit here and say, you buy one of mine, and I'll buy one of yours. So I wonder if any of you have had that experience. For him, it seemed to work.
We do.
You do?
We do.
So you can actually say that to someone.
Well, yeah, if you have slight interest in this, I have some interest in that, and let's come up with a deal, exactly. And it's worked, and it's worked for many years.
I do want to comment that when I first started going to the sales, I actually did make a decision at one point that I had to buy some rights. So the second time that I was in Frankfurt, I did actually buy 2 books. And I realized after I did that it did give me some cachet. So I could actually go to my meetings and say, well, I can't buy your book this year because I've just bought the rights to 2 books, so my budget is used up. But suddenly I thought people were looking at me with a little bit of renewed interest. So I think even unconsciously on my part, I thought, you know what, that is actually, people need to see that you're a player as well.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
there's as much give as there is take. So you have to be willing to do the same if you want people to buy from you.
And some people will come to your stand wanting to sell you something. And if it happens to be of interest, and if it matches your list, you've made a contact there, and you can look at it. You can legitimately look at it and pass a catalog back to them and take it back. And you know, some things may never come to be with certain partners, but again, like I said before, publishing programs are constantly evolving. So maybe one day there will be a deal to be made and had between two publishers.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for participating. Really valuable. Thanks. Thank you, everyone. And thanks for your questions.
Well, that was fantastic. I think, and as someone who goes to the fairs, not having been to Frankfurt in the last couple of years, I can mentally check off all these fantastic tips and notes. So thank you, Gillian. Thank you, Parisa, Hazel, and Adrienne. I think this has been incredibly informative, even for someone who feels a bit experienced in the field. And so I hope for the rest of you, you've also learned a lot. We have earned a slightly longer break. Coffee has been replenished, as well as hot water for tea. There's a little bit of fruit for those of you that need a little pick-me-up. And I hope that you take full advantage of the break. It's good to stretch, and so just circulate. So thank you very much. Again, welcome to our panel.